Hey everyone, welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. We haven't met in a little while, but we're here today. We're going to give a talk on email marketing strategies. Let me share my screen actually, and I'll give you some background on this talk. There we go. So my name is Dennis Shiao, organizer of the meetup. I'm here with Ashley Guttuso. The two of us will be presenting today. Ashley, why don't you take it from here, and then this is kind of a, not interactive, it's a fast-paced talk, so we'll probably just talk for about 30 minutes, but feel free to interrupt us with questions, either via audio or in the chat. And what else was I going to say? Oh, Ashley and I originally gave this talk at Content Marketing World in Cleveland back in September. And it was received pretty well. So we thought we'd give it again for this meetup group. So Ashley, why don't you take it away and get us started?
All right. We are going to be talking today about counterintuitive email marketing strategies that work. And part of the reason that Dennis and I came up with this topic originally for Content Marketing World was that we were seeing a lot of the same old repeat behaviors in email, and realizing that people needed some fresh ideas. So Dennis, I will just give you a that or something every time it's time to change a slide, because we're not in person and I can't give you the side wink.
Okay.
But what we're looking at here is a woman who is captivated, right? And this is what we're hoping for when we send our emails, right? We pour our hearts and souls into the perfect graphic and the perfect CTA and the perfect everything to send out to our mass distribution lists, and then pray that we didn't do something silly like leave the old subheader from the last email in the new email and things like that. But reality is that this is what they're seeing, right? It's really, really hard to win attention and to win the inbox. In fact, your audience has inbox fatigue. So what you really want to do is not be one of those little dots. You want to stand out, and you're going to need to do something almost counterintuitive to stand out. And so what we've put together for this presentation is 3 specific ways to be counterintuitive. And those are to be transparent, to be personal and relatable, and to be experimental. So Dennis is going to take us away with being transparent.
Actually, I think this one is for you.
Oh, okay. I didn't key you up in quite the right way.
Okay.
Can we back up the live transcript and segue that better? That was Dennis's slide. He wants to be crystal clear about how transparent you need to be. What you're looking at here is one way to be transparent, which is to make it hard to opt in. These little doodles are a signature move of Andre Chaperon and Sean Twig of Tiny Little Business. And they published this article called An Unconventional Approach to List Building. That's what that QR code will get you to. And the premise is that you want to be going after a pocket of people who actually want to receive your emails instead of anyone and everyone. So what they promote is going from this large audience to a pocket of people who the concept is that they have a shared worldview, because what you're doing in your marketing is world building for them. And so they argue that it's wiser to add some friction in and have the people who are on your list actually want to be on your list, instead of accidentally ending up on your list when you told them, hey, get this free download or this thing. So I'm not 100% against lead magnets, but I will say that the people who end up on your list from a lead magnet that is not closely associated to the topics that you are sending your emails about, they're not happy to be on that list. If they're very well aligned, then maybe they will be, but it's your job to be transparent and maybe sometimes even take an extra step to get on that list.
Okay, so this is the next example. Before I get into this example, I just wanted to take a step back and talk a little bit more about the whole premise for this talk that Ashley and I put together, which is email is a channel that is still effective today, but it's probably one of the oldest digital channels around. Email has been around from the beginning. And if you continue to do the same things, you're going to get the same results. Now, of course, if you have a world record performing email program that's working great, you should keep doing that, keep doing what you're doing. But chances are you're going to run into things where your email program will stagnate. And what we want to suggest here with this whole talk of being counterintuitive is not that every time you try something different, it's going to work. In fact, maybe more than half of the time it will not work. But it's the whole mindset, which is to try things out. And in some cases, just put something random out there, but measure the results, either quantitatively with data, or measure it qualitatively, as in, did I do something crazy, and like, did my people on my list reply to me and tell me how great that was? So it's all about, this whole talk is about the mindset. We wanted you to start to think different, and importantly, try things out, see what happens, and do more of the things that work. I believe there's not too much risk in trying something. It fails, or it kind of just doesn't do anything. You just move on and do the next thing. It's not going to do a whole lot of damage to you. Now, this particular example is there was a blog post from the team at SparkToro. In particular, there was a post by the VP of Marketing, Amber Natividad. And so her blog post was about counterintuitive tactics in marketing that work. And she gave an example back to the 1930s with Duncan Hines cake mix. So before 1933, I believe, most cake mixes that were sold, you add water to the mix, and then you create the mix and you pop it in the oven. In 1933, Duncan Hines introduced a new type of cake mix in which you were asked to add water and eggs. And let me see what the stat is here. Within a few weeks, they had captured more than 50% market share of cake mixes. And when a researcher interviewed some of the women who were using the cake mixes, predominantly that they were being used by women at the time, the women told the researchers that they bought the Duncan Hines mix that required the eggs because just adding water made them feel self-indulgent. So this is a case where Duncan Hines added friction to the cake mixing process and actually got stronger results, stronger sales. And it turns out the quality of the cake when you add eggs is a higher quality cake because it sticks less to the side of the pan, and it creates, it lasts longer. It's a great example because you might think to add friction, which is the eggs, would cause the customers to not adopt. They just stick with the easier one. But this was a case where adding friction led to higher sales, and it actually led to a better, higher quality end product, the cake. And then a little bit meta, but Amber's post about counterintuitive email marketing strategies, the blog post, started with a Twitter thread. You've probably seen these threads where it's like a whole bunch of tweets that are strung together. And she was saying how she put together these random counterintuitive things as a tweet thread. And then her boss, you might know Rand Fishkin, who's the founder of SparkToro, replied to her tweet saying, this could be a blog post. So then she took the Twitter thread and published it as a blog post. And I'm going to read Amber's quote about that, which I thought was
I have to correct you.
Uh-oh.
Her name is Amanda. I just want it on the transcript record.
I'm so sorry, Amanda.
It's okay. Like
That's
I was
horrible.
like two times I was like, it's okay. But the third time I was like, I'm standing up for, Amanda's everywhere.
Yes.
It's very close.
I have Amanda's name printed right here. So
You got it.
apologies,
It's
Amanda.
close.
So
We
when we're
all know
talking
that
about being counterintuitive, don't get people's names wrong. That's just never something to do. So
No,
apologies.
I get people's names wrong all.
So this is what Amanda wrote about the whole concept of her tweet thread that led to a blog post. She writes, content marketers have been trained to write blog posts under the guidance of a high volume keyword strategy. After all, it makes sense to create content that people are already searching for. But all writers know that the ideas worth writing about are the undiscovered ones that challenge common sense, regardless of search volume. So that's a whole another topic, but the whole concept of you don't always have to write for Google. And in fact, with Google's helpful content update, they're even saying, just give us really high quality. Okay, I've spoken enough on this particular one.
So what I loved about that one is that the concept of like making your form really short became popular a while back. It's like, just make it as easy as possible for them to sign up, right? The counterintuitive move is make it a little more difficult for them to sign up so that they actually are expressing a true desire to be a recipient of your emails. And so this is the same company that we showed the doodle from earlier. And they are long-winded. They are long-form writers. They are trying to teach you that this is what their emails look like. This is what being engaged with their business is like. It takes reading and diving in. It's the Emergent Marketing Series is their newsletter. And I got an issue today that I was like, oh, I'm going to forward this to 5 people who I think will be interested in this. So what we're showing here, though, is their newsletter sign up page. Do you see that long strip in the middle? The sign up CTA. So because on the left hand side, you see we're on the subscribe page. Like that's a tab in their top nav. At the very bottom, that's the CTA to click to sign up. They want you invested in what it is that their worldview is before you start getting emails from them. So this kind of goes along with it's almost self-indulgent to not add those eggs. It's almost too easy to get on some email lists, right? What we want is highly engaged recipients, and the way to get those is to get their mental buy-in before you send the first email, not 5 emails in when you've either earned their trust or lost it at that point. Like, go ahead and earn some trust before you make that ask. So I thought it was really interesting that they have it almost hidden, like it's almost hard to get on that list. And that makes it feel more special in some ways, just like the eggs make the cake feel more special, right? I did a thing. I made a decision.
Yeah, and actually the inverse example to this, I think Beth and other people here that run demand gen programs know about, there's some providers of content syndication. So you take your white paper, they put it on their network, and they'll drive leads across their network of websites. That's a case where I believe it's the opposite, where they make it so easy for the visitors to your white paper site, your white paper page, or to their site. They make it so easy for you to capture a lead that you might get 100 leads from your white paper, but it was so easy. It was like one click. They don't have to fill out a form, or maybe even they don't even click submit. But if they magically get opted in to say, I wanted this white paper, it's so easy that I've run programs where my peer in demand gen gets 100 leads from a white paper syndication, calls the sales development teams, call those 100 people, and about 70 of them say, who are you? And I never downloaded a white paper. So it's almost like you made it so easy that it really didn't happen. Whereas when you make it so hard or introduce friction, that often results in a higher quality subscriber or higher quality lead. And then this just plays into a similar case. So this is the whole concept of double opt-in. This is the concept where if you have a list, instead of saying, here's the form, click submit. It's a two-step process. So you say a subscriber wants to get on your list, then you have to send them an email that says, click here to verify that you really want to be on the list. This does a couple of good, so again, this is friction. This is good because it filters out any invalid emails. So if somebody mistyped their email or is intentionally trying to sign up with a phony address, they can't get on your list because this confirmation goes to that email. And I think this preconditions the subscriber to start to open your emails, because in order for them to get on your list, they have to receive an email from you and confirm that they want your emails. So you're already getting them in the process of getting email from you and opening it and acting on it. I have a personal newsletter. I don't currently use double opt-in, but I think I might consider doing that.
We do.
Yeah. And then, so we're still on the theme of being transparent. This is an example from a good friend, Chris Penn, who's a marketing expert. Chris has a couple of different newsletters, but he is very transparent in that if his newsletter is not for you, he wants you to unsubscribe. So if you see that big sign in the middle, that is in the body of his email. So unlike some brands who I will not name, where to unsubscribe from their emails, they put it like at the footer and they use the same background color to mix in, they kind of hide the unsubscribe link. That still happens today. Chris is saying, here it is. If this is not for you, click this huge button. And I think this relates to a very important point with email right now, which is that an unsubscribe can be a good thing. If your subscriber says these emails are not for me, that's fine, because they're probably not going to engage with you in going forward anyway. The worst thing is not to unsubscribe, but to not open. So if you're continually sending to someone and they never open your email, the email servers, the email service providers are going to start to see, they have data on that says that this sender does not get people to open their emails, and that will decrease your email reputation score. Even just as bad, or probably worse, is when they get your email and they click this is spam. So they're telling Gmail, Outlook 365, other providers, they're telling them that they think this was sent to me as spam or unsolicited. That's even worse. That'll even further damage your reputation. So I want you to remember that unsubscribes can be fine. They're far better than the alternatives of non-opens or market spam. So make your unsubscribe very visible, and you can almost welcome it if it's not right, if the subscriber is not right for your content.
All right, now we're going to jump into another way. This is kind of an e-commerce way to be transparent. One of the companies under the portfolio I work for is getarpu.com, which sends for subscription selling merchants an upcoming shipment notification. And one of the customers of this product, Jimmy Joy, is a standout user of a thing we call the delay link, which allows the subscriber to say, oh, I got too much of that product right now, or I'm going on vacation, etc. I want to put this off for 2 weeks, right? And so it can transcend D2C subscription and kind of remind us that it's a good thing sometimes to give people the option to control and have that flexibility with the thing that they are buying from you or the thing that they are receiving from you. If you are sending them marketing emails and content newsletter, etc., like the more power you can give them over picking and choosing when they see what they see and how, it's powerful to them, and they appreciate that you are giving them and enabling them to do these things. So Jimmy Joy in particular, when they introduced this feature, because they had been using the software before the feature existed, so they had great data around this, they had a way to see product churn reasons, right? And when they introduced the feature, they saw a 50% reduction in churn that had been attributed to too much product. Like, I have too much of this. I'm not ready for my next yet. Because before then, the only option was to go cancel, because they didn't want more stuff showing up when they weren't done with what they had. So a 50% reduction in churn is a big deal for an e-commerce subscription brand that's trying to roll out subscription, because they want that guaranteed renewal lifetime value MRR happening. The next slide shows you kind of just a quick visual so I can talk about a brand that actually removed delays from their email as an option. And they did it kind of blindly. What they didn't realize, because we weren't servicing this data, because the product wasn't like really built on the delay feature. But now we do, because we realized what happened to them. Before they had removed the delay, they had been averaging an 80% delay retention rate, which equates to the number of successful charges after someone clicked delay and went through a delay motion. Once they took the delay out, they had massive churn. And it took them a while to realize that removing the delay was the reason that they now had more cancellations going on. So sometimes being transparent is counterintuitive, and it sounds weird to say, but what we're really saying is be human. Treat people the way you would want to be treated. Give them the options to do the things you would want to do if you were the recipient of their emails or of their product.
And then this continues a little bit along the theme of unsubscribes. On the left is from a personal newsletter that I manage using MailChimp, and on the right is from Curated, which is a software that it's a company that Ashley worked for. So on the left, what I often do is, there are some people that sign up for my personal newsletter that they might have opened it at the beginning, but they stopped opening. I know, speaking from personal experience, it's not always the case that you intentionally disregard email. There are cases where Gmail or other providers will put your email out. It's hard to get into the inbox. Gmail has like a promotions tab, so it might be going in there. And there's some cases that I've done where I know I get a lot of emails from one sender, so I will create this is for my personal email, I'll create a filter in Gmail that says just stick this all into a folder. So it just gets out of my main inbox, because I consider that precious space. So I know that this can happen all the time to people you're trying to reach. It's just hard to get into that inbox, or there's some people that have 1,000+ unread in their inbox, so they kind of just let it sit there. It's like it's so much unread that they will never get to it being all read, so it just sits there. Anyway, what I do is, so the rule you might see here, it says do not open last 20 campaigns. So I send out a newsletter every other week. So 20 campaigns is 40 weeks. So it's getting close to a year. And if they've been added after a certain date and they're subscribed and they haven't opened the last 20 campaigns, I'm fine with saying they probably will not open the 21st campaign. So what I do is automatically unsubscribe them. And it just makes for a cleaner list, in that you'll be left with the people that will open. I think Ashley's going to talk about what I don't do, which I probably should do, is what's called a re-engagement campaign.
Yes, actually, if you'll go back to that slide, one of the things that we responded to was iOS, is it 15? I'm horrible at keeping up with the numbers. I know what changes they made, but essentially that introduced a lot of false opens. So you might have noticed in the last year that your open rate crept up, but you didn't see necessarily your engagement rate creep up. And what it does is, in Apple Mail, it kind of goes ahead and opens the email for the recipient, so that now the sender can't tell if it was Apple that opened that for them, but they never actually opened it, or if Apple opened it and then they opened it too. Like it creates a false sense of security around your open rates. And so what we decided was that engagement is really one of the more important factors anyway, right? That open rates have notoriously been like slightly unreliable for a long time. And so what we came up with was a way to look at engagement. So who hasn't clicked this in the past 2 months? Who hasn't clicked this in the past 6 months? And there's a way in there, and I'm sure in other ESPs as well, to create a reconfirmation email that basically says, hey, you still want to be around, right? Because I have people who open my email but do not click the links. And then I have people who click it. So it's kind of like taking that step between. This is also coming from Andre and Sean over at the Tiny Little Businesses. And I thought it was interesting what they did in response to those changes. And essentially it's that whenever any one of our email subscribers does not engage over a 2-month time period, they're automatically added to this re-engagement campaign. So they're going ahead and automating that. And the intention here is to check in and make sure that the people who are receiving it are still interested in receiving it. And one reason for that is not just because you want people opening your email, et cetera, but you want a really clean list. And it's all part of list hygiene, because the more engaged percentage you have on your entire list, the more you are favored by email clients that are trying to evaluate whether you are or aren't spam on a daily basis, right? So things like people replying to your email, things like the fact that you've taken all your unengaged subscribers and given them a chance to reconfirm and either gotten them off that list or gotten them or made sure they belong on that list. Those are all really important signals to send. So what was really interesting though, is that Andre and Sean were very transparent about the fact like, hey, here's how we're going to run things now. So if you don't click a thing or do a thing, you might get a re-engagement campaign. Don't be surprised. Just keep letting us know if you want to be around or use it as an opportunity to say goodbye.
All right, so that covers the first theme, which is be transparent. The second theme is going to be relatable. I think a key point to discuss here is that we will be using some examples from personal newsletters. A personal newsletter is a person who is named will send out a newsletter to their list. And I think by the nature of it being a personal newsletter, it's easy for a personal newsletter to be relatable because it's in the voice of a person. But I think a key point here is we will show other examples where we want brands. Some of you might be doing an email program for a brand, for your employer. You can still be relatable as a brand, and we'll use some of the examples of people to show you how you can transfer that to be relatable as a brand.
All right, so what you're looking at here is a little excerpt from a newsletter that I send out for audience ops. And this is opt-in weekly. And I went out and I asked a couple of newsletter creators what they had learned through the process and what they might want to share. And I asked for like one lesson. And most people listened to that request. But the one person who didn't follow instructions was Ann Hanley because of number 12. It's not the one that's highlighted. But I thought it was just so meta and perfect because she said you asked for one thing, but I wanted to make a final point, which is that you should always deliver more value than an audience would reasonably expect, which I think is also counterintuitive approach to email as well. But number 8 was really interesting. And there's a QR code to go get you signed up to Anne's newsletter. If you don't receive it, it is in her voice. And she's recently launched a newsletter in her voice, I think, for marketing profs as well. But this has been her personal newsletter to teach us all how to be better writers and better marketers, right? But one thing that she is very strong on is that your newsletter needs an MC. And in classic Anne voice, she says, even you looking at me with that side eye, Mrs. B2B brand, solution brand. And I think that people are afraid of being less buttoned up and more human when it comes from sending something from a brand than they are when they send something to their personal group of friends. But the reality is that people buy things from people, and people want to be emotionally triggered by other people. I can't remember the last time I was like, this brand really gets me. It's so-and-so at this brand really gets me, right? Like it feels that way. And so on the next slide, I've got an example of this, because we shouldn't be afraid. I think one fear is that you will tie your communications to a particular employee, and that employee might leave. Oh my gosh, they might leave the company. And then all of the rapport they've won with our audience will be lost. But the contrarian view to that is that you should harness the power of their personality while they are at your company and replace it or evolve it if they are no longer with your company. So a great example of this, if you've heard of branch.io, huge email list, over 300,000 people get this email, and it's from a person at Branch. It's from Alex Bauer, and it's in first person. It is a curated mobile growth newsletter that he sends, and they're very honest about the fact that these are his opinions. But he has used this newsletter and speaking at events to create a platform for himself and to become a thought leader in the industry he sells to. So the next slide has a QR code to a podcast that his VP of marketing went on. And she kind of talked about this among other marketing tactics that have worked really well for Branch, because they do an entire third-party website called mobilegrowth.org, which is all powered by Branch. So they're taking a very think like a media company approach, and the newsletter is one piece of that. Her podcast is one piece of that. But in this podcast, if you want to go listen, you can listen to her talk about the fact that he is irreplaceable, but that she's not really afraid of that, because what he's doing while he's there is worth the risk of him being irreplaceable, right? So put a person behind the wheel of the communications that you send, and you will see people become more responsive to that and become to talk about your brand more as a friend, as someone they have invited into their inbox, instead of this anonymous corporate entity that sends them some communications with, dearest customer, or I'm inflating the language around how formal things can get, but corporate talk when you get it in an email, you recognize it right away, and you go, oh, the CEO had to approve this, right? Kind of pull back the curtain and be a human about it.
So related example is Microsoft. I think I've been on different email lists for Microsoft, and an email from Microsoft, they're a very big company, they're a well-known brand, but it probably will feel impersonal. They're telling you about their latest product update or what have you. But what about an email that is from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and it's written in his voice? Of course, maybe someone ghostwrote it for him, but it's still from he's in the from line. Maybe even his profile photo you can see, and he's got a photo in the email. I think that is something that I would find more relatable from Satya Nadella than an email from big old Microsoft. And then I didn't intend to lead into another, but this is a case where the brand Gorgeous, they send an e-com digest, and they have it relatable in that it's from a named person, Emma, and you can see Emma's profile photo. So this is probably in Gmail or also in Outlook. Now, when you receive an email from someone, if they have if they've uploaded a profile photo, that'll render in your inbox. That is immediately more relatable than if there was no photo, or if it was just the gorgeous, the brand, the logo. Now you're getting an email from Emma. That immediately makes of course, you can probably sense that this is an automated email, but the fact that it is from a named person gives you is better. And I just had a related example. I have a particular website that's using WordPress, and I got the renewal for the domain registration. And oh, I thought I had it on my desk, but it was from a named person at WordPress. I forgot his name, but they had his photo. And so in the signature of the email, it had his name, headshot, and his title, which was Happiness Engineer. So I thought that just made me feel warm and fuzzy about WordPress.
My one thing to add here is that you have a bigger problem than just whether or not people are opening. If you don't have someone on staff who is willing to be personally associated with the emails you send. Think that through. If there is no one raising their hand and saying, I'll be the personality behind the email, then that reflects to me that you are potentially ashamed of what you are sending.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if it is the case that you have no one in your organization that will do it, but you're responsible for your email program and you're in marketing, I often encourage people, you should be the person. You should put yourself out there as Emma from marketing, and the email should come from you. If there's no better fit in your organization, because that makes the marketer better known to your prospects and customers. Okay, so continuing on the theme of being relatable, some of you are familiar with Joe Polizzi. He's the founder of Content Marketing Institute. I was just telling another attendee before we started that Joe's latest business is called The Tilt, and that business is helping content entrepreneurs with their business, people who are in business for themselves using their content to generate revenue. His personal newsletter is called The Random Newsletter, and he numbers his issues, which I think is an interesting idea, even for B2B brands, to number your issues, because then there's some structure behind it and you're not just sending, like spamming people for each email. There's some intention behind the email itself. And the neat thing that Joe does is he connects the number of the edition, the number itself, to something in his life. So in this example, it was the 93rd edition, and he connects it to the year 1993. Joe mentioned that the most engagement he gets on his email is to comment on the opening, which is kind of neat. I want to read to you from his 94th edition, because it makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. So in the 94th edition of the Random Newsletter, he wrote, 1994 will go down as possibly the greatest year of my life. That was the year I met my future bride. I walked into a leadership class at Bowling Green State University, waiting for the teacher to arrive. And then she appeared, wearing a hat and a DC sweatshirt at the front of the class as a student teacher. I knew at that moment that she was something special. 3 months later, we went on our first date. 28 years later, and she is still the one. Also makes me warm and fuzzy, because makes me feel warm inside, because I happen to know Joe's wife, Pam. She's a wonderful person. So something like that, we're not even mentioning all the actual content that Joe delivers in his newsletter. If you can do something that you regularly feature, and in this case, it's the introduction, then it really can be relatable. And in some cases, as in the case with Joe, you're actually going to get people more, they enjoy the introduction so much that that's the one thing that they focus on. And that can be okay.
It's interesting because it's almost about someone willing to be vulnerable on behalf of their brand, right? And so being personable is that way. What you're looking at here is a little thing that Ann Henley calls, she has a different word, a phrase for it. She calls it, like, she has this metric that she made up, the open to write back rate, which we've kind of condensed down lately. I'm hearing it called the reply rate. But I do a bit of a Joe in the intro to Opt-in Weekly, where I try to take experience from my life and then tie it to the topic of the newsletter, which is for people in content marketing and for people who are specifically sending newsletters, right? And so I try to metaphorically tie it or bring in a lesson I've recently learned from work I'm actively doing. So my inspiration is what's going on with me right now or the people in my life, and how can I relate that to a lesson, because I feel like storytelling is the best way to teach lessons, right? So this email in particular, I had just had an experience where I spent like a full 12 hours chasing a cruise boat, and that became part of the introduction to Opt-in Weekly. It's a very long and drawn out story. You can go check out that issue of the newsletter if you go to optinweekly.com and search Carnival or something. But a flight was canceled and a family of 4 ended up needing to drive 12 hours. We ended up broken down on the side of the road, got in with an Uber driver who then commenced to have a fender bender. So it was a very, very long day. Like, I've had 2 children by C-section, unplanned C-sections, and this day was more intense and stressful than those birthing experiences. So what I'm pointing out here, though, is that sharing something like that, and I tied it to newslettering, I brought it home, but sharing something like that gets responses. Being human gets responses, and brands should be thinking more about how they're going to be human or share their humans' stories to bring people in and to help them connect with the brand in those ways.
So a related example is one that I did. So my newsletter, I mentioned, goes out every other Friday. And this was back in the pandemic. So it was during 2020. And I had a call with my dad, and he was telling me about some of the podcasts he listens to. So it turns out there's a podcast called The Daily from the New York Times that he started listening to regularly. And I just thought, why don't I interview my dad on, so my dad is, I think it's the Great Generation, is the generation before boomers. And I thought maybe marketers would be interested in his content consumption patterns. He listens to a certain amount of podcasts. He watches certain channels on cable news to get up to date on current events. So I just did a quick interview with him via email, and I published it in my newsletter. And then I think it's helpful to have photos of the person you're interviewing. And as Ashley was mentioning, the reply rate. So it's like, if you think of the number of replies you get divided by the total number of opens of the people who open your newsletter, this was my highest ever reply rate. People would reply back and tell me how much they enjoyed it. People even took to Twitter and talked about it. In this case, Kathy was saying how some of the things that some of my dad's podcasts and programs are in common with her. So I think yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
You ready?
Oh, go ahead.
I get to say, the last thing I want to challenge you to do is experiment.
Yeah, I think we went longer now than we did at Content Marketing World. So I know we're a little bit short on time, but one of the things that we like to talk about, when Instagram first came out, it was like your idealized view of yourself with the filters. And it was always like, we're looking for the perfect photo. Whereas TikTok I think is just a lot more authentic. So Instagram might be the left, which is like, you're at the beach and it's the perfect beach. And aren't I great to pick this perfect beach? But we all know on the right is the reality, which is it's crowded and, not as pleasant.
The premise behind this is that people are skeptical. People are very skeptical when you are overly polished. So some experimental things that I'd like to encourage people to do, and I've brought some examples here today to say, hey, it's true, it's possible, are to think counterintuitively about what your recipient expects from your brand. Because I think we can all get very trapped into a highly designed and highly produced email program. And that's not always necessarily the best direction to take depending on who your audience is. So this is, if you've not subscribed and you're interested in newsletters and email programs and even journalism, Dan Oshinsky is the former newsletter editor at The New Yorker and BuzzFeed, and he is now a newsletter consultant. His company is called Inbox Collective, and he's consulting on sending newsletters, but yet his newsletter is called Not a Newsletter. And if you'll go to the next slide, I'll show y'all kind of what you get behind that CTA, which is actually a Google Doc. And I asked him about this, and he said that he launched it as a Google Doc because it allowed him to get started as quickly as possible. How many of us would send a link to a Google Doc from our brand and say, here's all the information we think would be helpful to you? It's not overly designed. It's not on a HubSpot landing page. We are just trying to get you information that will be valuable as quickly as possible and as simply as possible. Not many, because we would go, oh, we've got to be able to track who came here and where they are in their buyer's journey and all of the things, right? But he he sacrificed that, there's a better word for the transcript, and decided that, you know, at first he was just hoping to get 10 people to sign up in month one, and he got 400 in the first 3 days. So when he left The New Yorker, he had 1,700 subscribers, and he's now up to 8,500 subscribers. And he said, and I love this, that it's not a huge list, but that's partly by design, because he wanted it to be really hard to find the doc and sign up, very much along the same lines of make it hard to opt in. So then when I send you something, I know you really want it. And his advice was just to start as soon as you can, as simply as you can. So some of you in the startup fields might feel this resonates strongly with you, is that you're waiting to do a thing until you've done another thing. And the counterintuitive advice to that is don't wait to share valuable advice with an audience who can buy from you. You don't need a lot to start, he said, and the sooner you start, the sooner you can build that audience and like learn what they need from you, which matters more than this perfect tech stack or design or lead magnet, etc. So that's one great example of being very experimental and just using the tech that is handy to you. In the next, I will encourage you to consider plain text. Margot Aaron sends a wonderful newsletter every Thursday. Her business is that QR code is going to take you to That Seems Important is her website. And her newsletter breaks all the rules. It's sometimes, it's always plain text, but it's sometimes breaking grammar rules. There's a lot of like slang in there. You'll see now in this example, there are a couple of all caps, but she is a storyteller and she is a writer, and her buyer is a reader. Someone who's willing to invest in reading. And so she kind of pours her thoughts out in a stream of consciousness, but very well executed email once a week that is speaking in the language her audience wants to be spoken to. Does that make sense? I'm not saying everyone should go out and do a plain text Margot Aaron style newsletter with lowercase subject line and something kind of esoteric or exotic in the content. But I am saying know who your audience is and know what they would find refreshing. So stop designing for the boxes that people have told you things need to fit in, and figure out what kind of box your recipient wants to open. And we're wrapping up. This is me. I'm at Audience Ops. We do content marketing. We help people with all kinds of things like blogs and newsletters and content strategy. So subscribe to Opt-in Weekly or reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. I'm Ashley Guttuso, and I'd be happy to answer questions you might have.
And this is me. I run a small marketing agency called Attention Retention. The newsletter that I mentioned, I think it's behind this QR code, but if you do a Google search for Content Corner newsletter, that is my newsletter. It comes out every other Friday. So the next issue is coming out this Friday. And we have time for probably 2 questions.
I can stick around.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you got a question, you can unmute yourself and ask it, or you can use the chat to ask a question. Okay, so the question from Craig, know of any great examples of company using ML or AI to create gradual focus and accuracy of randomized tests? I don't think I do.
Rasa, I think, might be the closest to that. Have y'all heard of that? They're kind of the AI version of Curated. And I think what they're doing is, it's rasa.io. And I think what they're doing is you curate links and then they send them to the recipient, and then they watch what they're clicking. And then they use that to send them more links in that topic vein. What was interesting is I was subscribed to someone sending through this through 2 different email accounts. And so I intentionally clicked different category topics in the different accounts just to see how well it worked. And sometimes it was on target and sometimes it wasn't, but what I felt it lacked was kind of a human touch. I don't know if that's necessarily what you're looking for, but that to me is what I've seen in terms of an ESP trying to learn what someone would be more interested in. I think you have to have a large enough audience to really use that data to then decide what content to create.
Sure. Thanks.
What was
Question from Julie, what was counterintuitive about the personalization part? Julie, did you mean the personal MC part, or the being relatable from a person? If you meant from the personal MC point of view, I think it's counterintuitive because most brands are not doing it. I think obviously, if you're a personal newsletter by nature, you are your own personal MC, but most brands are just sending emails from the brand and in the brand voice. All right, and I think with that, we will wrap things up for today. Ashley, thanks again for doing this encore presentation with me. And let's see, our next meetup happens on November 10th. So a couple of weeks away, we're having a smash bang in person and Zoom meetup on the same day on November 10th. So we'll be on Zoom like this at the usual time. And then we're getting together that evening in the Bay Area in San Mateo at Fieldwork Brewing. So hope to see you in November.
I want to hear you say smash bang again.
Smash bang. All right, thanks everyone.
It sounds like something like you would drink in a Roald Dahl scene.
Thank you.
Thanks, then.
All right.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.